Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm the King County Sheriff. Contrary to my usual style, I'm going to kind of wing this one because this is a very, very complicated case that all of us are doing our best to understand, even though we've made a number of arrests. So we'll do it. I'll try to do this kind of at a 10,000 foot level. We'll take as many questions after we've all spoken, when we're all done, and answer the other questions you may have. Obviously, this is a prostitution case. This is a human trafficking case is a better way to put this. And from an overview standpoint, we all know what Backpage is, backpage.com. This is Backpage on steroids. Much, much bigger. It involves the organized crime, essentially. By any definition, the people involved in this are involved in organized crime in the Seattle area. Now, when I was a vice detective, what we did was a lot different than what happens today. I worked the street. I worked Pacific Highway South. And of course, there were women that worked the hotels, but there was no internet. You couldn't put ads in the phone book. There was no Backpage. Obviously, times have changed since I was on the street. And now there is the internet. And that's where prostitution has evolved to, is the internet. And these sites have come up on the internet, many of them. We're only going to talk about two today because those are the two that we've investigated and shut down. And these sites are a place for men to go who want to be involved in prostitution, and it's a place for women where women can advertise. And it's an opportunity for the men who are coming to meet these women to be vetted, to make sure they're not police officers, to keep track of who they are. And we get that, we understand that. Of course, it's still illegal. And this particular investigation started in the spring of 2015. And it involved a website called the Review Board, thereviewboard.net. And it was a place where people involved in prostitution could advertise and where men could ask to hook up with a particular woman, and they would be vetted. And this website facilitated prostitution. And this is not unique to this area. In fact, TRW is accessed all over the country. It has about as many as 14,000 members. And out of TRB, the review board, another website was established. And it was men who were on that website that formed their own group called the League. And the League is actually nationwide. We don't know how many members are in the League nationwide, but we do know there are 12 to 14 members of the League here in the Seattle area. And they set up their own website. It's called kgirlsdelight.com. And K stands for Korean. And these almost exclusively were Asian women that were brought over here to work in these brothels. And these brothels, for the most part, were located in the city of Bellevue. The women were trafficked. From what we can determine, they were brought into this country either illegally through Canada, or they overstayed their visa, and many of them were debt bondage situations where their families in South Korea owed a debt, typically to organized criminals in South Korea, and they had to pay off that debt. So they were brought over here, like this one here, and held more or less, against their will in these brothels. And if they were able to pay off their debt, and sometimes they were in this country illegally, they typically spoke no English, they had nowhere to go. And they knew that if they were arrested, they'd be deported. So they stayed. They weren't allowed out for the most part. They weren't given any money to speak of for the most part, and they were trafficked up and down the West Coast to other similar situations. So we got involved in this investigation. As of Tuesday night, when we arrested several members of the League, we served around 126 search warrants. and court orders. And as you know, we shut down TRB. This is an investigation that is unprecedented in the size and scope anywhere in the country that's done by local police. And we did this investigation really for two reasons. First, and most importantly, is to rescue these women. These women are true victims. Make no mistake about it. These women are victims, and we wanted to rescue them out of that horrible life that they found themselves in. And secondly, from the victim's standpoint, this is a cash-only business. This is a business that is run, has become organized, and that leads to all sorts of other crimes. Robberies, a homicide that occurred in Bellevue that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. It begets more and more criminal behavior. Thirdly, we want to send a message to the men in the Seattle area that want to think about starting a website like this, that you are committing the crime of promoting prostitution in the second degree. And those are the arrests we have made now. Promoting prostitution in the second degree. By setting up these websites, by facilitating prostitution. We don't want that to occur anymore, or any more than it already is, because if you do, we will come after you. And thirdly, we want to send a message to the customers of these women. They're committing a misdemeanor, okay? It's a misdemeanor, and they're probably not going to get arrested, but we know who they are. And the reason we know who they are because they had to be vetted by this organization. That means they were in most cases required to furnish a business email and a photo of their driver's license. And then of course, the people at the other end, at the review board, would erase all of that. Well, we all know that you can't erase information from your computer. And that's where a lot of our search warrants went. Now, we're not going to go out and track these men down and arrest them, but they're all going to be in the case file. And all those case files are going to be subject to public disclosure if you're interested in that. Now, the league, the local league, these 12 to 14 members would meet periodically, and they'd meet in a restaurant or a pub, and they'd go over their business. At least two of them that we know now were also brothel owners. They were running these brothels in expensive apartment buildings in the city of Bellevue. They would meet, and we infiltrated, with an undercover detective, we infiltrated the league. That's where a lot of our information came from. And we intend to do this again if we need to. If anybody thinks that this operation that we took down this week is a victimless crime, they are delusional. And they have no idea the scope of this. They have no idea what they're talking about, and I don't want to hear about that. These women were trafficked, they were true victims, and this type of crime cannot continue in our area. So that's a very brief overview. There's much more to this case. I'd like to introduce Chief Milet from the city of Bellevue.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Bellevue was instrumental in assisting us and investigating this case.
So I'm not as sharp as the sheriff with being able to retain all of this and speak off the cuff because he's really a master at it. I got to go with the script. If I don't stick to the script, we will be here for about 3 hours. So forgive me for looking down as much as I will be, but I want to make sure I get this correct. This past Tuesday evening, January 5th, 2016, members of the Bellevue Police Department, the King County Sheriff's Office, the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation implemented a large-scale field operation which led to the arrest of 10 members of the criminal organization known as the League. The field operation, which included targets in the city of Bellevue, King County, and Pierce County, continued into Wednesday, January 6th, where an additional four individuals were arrested. The preliminary numbers that we have: we arrested 11 members of the League and the Review Board. We arrested 3 brothel owners. 12 brothels were shut down. We seized over $70,000, 3 vehicles, and 1 firearm. We anticipate additional monies and property will be seized. And most importantly, 12 exploited victims were rescued and offered services to escape their situation. I want to take this moment and thank all of the officers, supervisors, prosecutors, agents, dispatchers, and victim support groups for their professionalism, dedication, and commitment to the successful outcomes we have witnessed. I would also like to acknowledge the Bellevue Fire Department for their support during this operation. We could not have been as successful in our efforts to dismantle this criminal enterprise without the active involvement of our federal partners. I would like to thank the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Homeland Security Investigations for their support and guidance. I want to specifically commend members of the King County Sheriff's Department Criminal Intelligence Unit, as well as members of the Bellevue Police Department Vice Unit. Their work in this case was exceptional. So how did we become involved in this case? In April 2015, the Bellevue Police Department received a complaint from a local resident who reported seeing suspicious activity at a local high-end luxury apartment complex in the downtown Bellevue area. Detectives discovered the apartment in question was in control of Mr. Donald Mueller, a 68-year-old white male and a key member of the criminal organization known as the League. And in addition to that, the most prolific and active poster on the review board. In the course of the investigation, in investigating the original complaint, Bellevue detectives obtained evidence that Mr. Mueller was in control of the apartment for the purposes of trafficking women for sexual purposes, and the apartment was being effectively used as a brothel. As the case was being investigated, Mr. Mueller broke the lease and moved his criminal enterprise to a different location, which was another downtown luxury apartment complex. However, this time, Mr. Mueller enlisted the help of Mr. Michael Durnall, a 47-year-old white male, in order to further his criminal activities. Mr. Mueller asked Mr. Durnall to lease the apartment in Durnall's name in order to conceal Mueller's identity and continued involvement in this illegal sex trafficking enterprise. Mr. Durnall leased the apartment for the purposes of trafficking women for sexual crimes. Neither of these men lived in the apartments. As Bellevue detectives were building their case against Mr. Mueller and Mr. Durnall, they consulted with their colleagues from the King County Sheriff's Office and discovered both agencies were working parallel investigations involving Mr. Mueller. When this was realized, our two agencies decided to join forces and work together with a singular purpose of dismantling this human trafficking organization, rescuing the victims from sexual servitude, and putting those responsible for this forced sexual servitude in jail. With the assistance of the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Department of Homeland Security Investigations, we did just that. It's interesting to note that Mr. Mueller and Mr. Durnall started their participation in this criminal activity as buyers of trafficked women. Mr. Mueller worked his way up through the ranks of this criminal enterprise to a position in which he fully controlled the activities of the brothel. Mr. Durnall, for his part, moved into a promoter position. Both men financially profited from this criminal enterprise. As I've already stated, several of the brothels where these victims were exploited, coerced, or forced to provide sexual services for a fee were being operated out of places that provided cover and concealment for this activity, namely high-end, luxury, upscale apartment complexes located in the downtown Bellevue area. I would like to say up front, the management of these apartment complexes, when we brought the situation to their attention, were extremely cooperative. In fact, I would go so far as to say they assisted in rescuing these victims from their situation. As our team continued to dig into this well-organized group, we discovered additional locations in Bellevue that were being used to further the sex trafficking trade. In total, our detectives identified 13 individual apartments within 7 apartment complexes and townhomes that were being operated as brothels. Again, in each case, the perpetrators were able to go unnoticed as these locations were carefully selected by the managers of the brothels due to their reputation and location in the downtown Bellevue area. However, these crimes didn't occur in Bellevue alone. Our investigation led to search warrants and arrest warrants being served in King County and Pierce County. We have identified participants in this criminal enterprise in the following states: Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Minnesota, Texas, Georgia, Illinois, Virginia, New Jersey, New York, and Massachusetts. Our officers have made contact with our colleagues in those states and made them aware of our findings, and we will assist them in their investigations as needed. I've been a police officer for over 27 years. Throughout my career, I've heard the argument that sex between two consenting adults is not a crime. I agree with that. Can't argue with that. So long as the contact was truly consensual and there wasn't a fee attached to the interaction. However, in cases such as this, the sexual contact was not consensual, and these women were being forced to perform sexual acts through exploitation, force, and coercion. In this case, these victims were transported to the United States from South Korea for one purpose and one purpose only: to provide sexual services to a network of criminals who have no concern for their physical, mental, or emotional welfare, period. They do not care that these women are forced into these situations for the various reasons that they are. They have one thing on their mind, and that is to use these victims for their own sexual pleasure, gratification, and in some cases, financial gain. They have no concern that these women were working 12-hour days, 6 to 7 days a week, servicing between 2 and 10 buyers each day. I shudder when I think about the toll it takes on these human beings who many times feel like they are left with no other option. I've also heard the argument that sex for a fee is a victimless crime. I reject that position. And let me tell you why. On March 31st, 2015, a Thai national was working in a brothel located in the city of Bellevue. Again, the location was in an upscale luxury apartment complex in our downtown area. An individual posing as a buyer gained access to the apartment for the purposes of what some would say, quote, to engage in consensual sex, end quote. Well, that didn't quite happen. The buyer, Mr. Song Wang, proceeded to attack the victim and stab her multiple times before finally slitting her throat and murdering her. Mr. Wang proceeded to start a fire in the apartment to cover his tracks. This was a 368-unit apartment complex where residents included men, women, and children. Had the sprinkler system failed, the results could have been more catastrophic than they were, and many more lives could have been lost. Victimless crime? I don't think so. Again, the promoters and managers of these brothels are not concerned with the safety and well-being of the good, law-abiding citizens who live in these complexes, people who want a safe place to raise their families and to live their lives in peace. The deviants who engage in the human trafficking sex trade only care about two things: fulfilling their own sexual desires and making money. I know I speak on behalf of all law enforcement agencies when I say that we are committed to locating and rescuing these women from the forced sexual servitude and to put the promoters, managers, and buyers in jail. The Bellevue Police Department will continue to work hard to locate brothels operating in our city and to shut them down. Thank you. Sheriff.
Spell your name, please.
It's Steve Mylett, M-Y-L-E-T-T.
Thank you.
Sure.
It just so happens, hi, I'm Dan Satterberg, I'm the King County Prosecuting Attorney. It just so happens that January is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. This is what human trafficking looks like. You know, this case reveals a dark side of our community that we live in. We like to think we're a progressive community. We stand up for human rights and human dignity. And human trafficking and sexual slavery, they're just problems that happen somewhere else. Well, we're wrong. It happens right here all the time, and it has been happening here for many years. The systematic importation of vulnerable young women for sexual abuse, exploitation, and criminal profiteering has been going on for years, and it came to a stop this week. We intend to keep up the pressure so that this is a thing of the past. The extraordinary police work that's involved here, together with assistance from senior deputy prosecuting attorneys in my office, has brought this deplorable industry out of the shadows and into the light. And now these men will face justice in front of the community. These defendants, we allege, were absolutely devoted to the commercial sexual exploitation of vulnerable, powerless immigrant women. These men formed what they called the League and ran an online forum for the advancement of prostitution for men who routinely purchase sex. They euphemistically called themselves hobbyists. And their hobby was the criminal sexual abuse of women, brought here against their will, in servitude, to pay off debts back in Korea for the sexual gratification of these men in King County and for the profit of their pimps. These defendants, we allege, promoted the continued exploitation of these women on a site they called the reviewboard.net. They solicited and encouraged other men to go and pay for sex with these women and then to post reviews of them. And they did so with the knowledge that the more business they could create for the pimps and the brothels, that the more women would come from Korea as part of this network. This enterprise was grimly effective. In response to the market cultivated by these men, numerous brothels have sprung up in our community and have served as part of a national pipeline that transports these exploited women from across the ocean for use in the prostitution industry here. And we believe that there are links to at least 15 states that this pipeline goes through. Now, I'm pleased to report that as part of this investigation and part of the efforts by this team, that the reviewboard.net was seized yesterday and put out of business. If you go there today, you will see the logos of the departments represented here. Another website started by these defendants, K-Girls Delight, which has literally millions of hits a month, has also disappeared from the internet. Now, in addition to targeting the League and the Review Board, this investigation raided and shut down, as we heard, about 13 different area sites for prostitution. The operators of those brothels, if they're not already in custody, we are hunting for them. And in doing so, a dozen exploited women have been recovered in this operation. They're being interviewed. We want to help them. We consider them victims of human trafficking. And we don't know all of the personal stories of these women yet that were imported for prostitution here and for the profit of others. But we do know the story of at least one woman, we call her A.N., who was forced into prostitution in the United States to pay off a family debt in South Korea. We think this is a very common reason that women are forced into this pipeline. Her story has marked the beginning of the investigation. It's consistent with so many other stories that we have heard of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. We'll not be seeking to charge, or convict, or prosecute these women. We believe that they are victims in need of help, and we will be trying to help them. They have likely suffered trauma and abuse, and humiliation. Their sexual autonomy was stolen from them repeatedly by the people who put them into this pimping pipeline, by the men who repeatedly came to demand sex for money, and by those who frequented the review board, who posted reviews, and certainly by the pimps who profited from their tears. It's not likely that many of them will say that they willingly came to King County, Washington, so that they could be kept in small apartments all day, every day, for weeks at a time, isolated from their families and forced to have sexual relations with up to 10 men a day. It's unlikely that many of them will say this is what they had in mind. What we're announcing today and what's going to continue to unfold in the weeks to come is an unprecedented law enforcement action. We're aware of no other jurisdiction in the country that has targeted an organized network of sex buyers for promoting prostitution, has jailed them and charged them with felonies, while at the same time shutting down the pipeline of the brothels and the pimps that were set up to meet the demand created by these buyers. Under state law, to promote prostitution, one simply must advance it. We have reproduced a small sample of thousands of comments that came off of the review board, and we will be able to provide those for your examination later. We intend to use them to give these comments and others to the jury that will hear this case so that they can see what is clear, that these men gathered together to advance and promote prostitution. It's clear to us that without the demand created by these men that were in the so-called league, that there would be no market here for trafficking these young women. Without the demand, there is no harm. We hope that this action will send a message across our community, across the country, and across the ocean that the pipeline of human trafficking for sexual abuse and criminal profit must stop. We're better than this in our community. This is 2016, in a county we've named after the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We are better than this, and we're no longer going to stand by knowing that women are imported here for sexual abuse and criminal profit. The commercial sexual abuse of a woman is not a hobby. It is a crime, and we're going to treat it that way. If convicted of promoting prostitution in the second degree, which is the charge that most of these defendants have been charged with, it is a Class C felony. It carries a 1 to 3 month standard range and a maximum penalty of up to 5 years. I'm going to turn it back over to Sheriff Urquhart for your questions.
The only thing I'm going to add is this was an unprecedented investigation that could not have occurred without the cooperation of our partners with the Bellevue Police Department, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Prosecutor's Office. It's a very unique investigation. As Dan said, it hasn't happened before, but it really shows the great partnership that we have in King County between the various law enforcement agencies, both local and federal. I can't say enough about what a great job our detectives did, Bellevue, FBI, the Sheriff's Office. They just did a fantastic job, and they can sleep well tonight, knowing that there's at least 12 women that are in a much better place today than they were a week ago. And we'll take questions.
Sheriff, how many names were, you mentioned that in the case file there are names of the men who had, were customers or whatever you want to call it, of the prostitutes. How many names did you recover?
I don't think we know yet. I don't think we have a final count yet, but there's going to be lots and lots and lots. And when you look at the press packet we'll have for you, you'll see just a brief look at how many people were posting on there.
When you mean it's going to be public disclosure, are you intending to let people know that you have those names and they'll be made public?
I expect you to let them know. Yes. So the answer is yes.
Could you talk, or maybe Mr. Satterberg, could you talk about the decision not to track down those men, given that you have their driver's license information, and charge them with any crimes?
Well, this investigation is really just beginning. And where it leads, we don't know yet. But we had in our sights the men who created this review board, who called themselves the League, who seemed to devote every waking hour of their time to promoting prostitution and to encouraging other similarly minded men to come and exploit these women. So that's the beginning of this investigation.
That's a question about the women outside. There are a lot of sex workers who say that this investigation, yes, it did rescue 12 victims who weren't planning to be prostitutes, but what about the women who use the same site, they say, to ensure their safety in the sex trade?
Can I take that?
Take that.
Oh,
Go ahead.
If you could talk to my victim in Bellevue, she would tell you something different, because she was posting on those sites as well. And while this person may have been vetted, he went in there for a criminal purpose. These women are being abused, they're being raped, they're being murdered. So is it a safe place to conduct business? I would argue no, it's not. And it's a shame that these women feel they have no other alternative to pursue some sort of life other than this sexual servitude.
Was all of the activity on there illegal? Was it all prostitution?
You want to take? We're in the beginning stages of this investigation, and I'll turn it over to Sheriff.
Was the Sun Wayne case tied to this? Was there any connection?
Was there any connections? There could be. That case is still under investigation. Unfortunately, the victim in the case, we're not able to get information from her because she's dead. But we continue to talk to witnesses, and we're developing that. And if it does pan out to be that, I'll be the first one to tell you.
Are there women out there who still need to be rescued as part of this investigation?
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, throughout this country, right? But as far as this operation, I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that.
How many women do you believe were using this site or being used on this site?
We can't tell. It's so huge. The site was so huge. There's no way of knowing how many women were using the site to advertise their situation. We don't know. And to answer your question, yes, we're confident there are lots and lots of other women that are in exactly the same situation here. We've just taken down one small tentacle of what's going on. There are still umpteen websites out there that we haven't gotten to yet.
Well, and speaking to that, I mean, why not go after Backpage? I mean, that's been well known about that. Why all of a sudden this site gets shut down?
Because this site came to our attention. It happened in the city of Bellevue. We worked with the city of Bellevue. We can't take them all down. We'd sure like to. Doesn't mean we're not going to go after other sites. Everybody should know that. Everybody in the public should know that. We can only do one thing at a time.
12 brothels shut down, 12 victims rescued. In this case, does a brothel equal one woman in one apartment?
No, it equals one apartment. A brothel indicates one apartment.
What's the immigration status of the 12 victims, and would it be different had they been charged with a crime?
It probably would be different. All of the women, because their victims are eligible for a T visa, which allows them to stay in this country, has to be approved by Homeland Security. We are working with them, letting them know what their options are. Again, we don't know what their immigration status is at this point. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has provided numerous Korean interpreters for us to be able to interview these women, and those interviews are ongoing as we speak.
Where are they staying tonight? Where are they now?
I don't know, but they're not in detention, if that's what you're asking.
Who you arrested? You said 2 locals, but you have at least 10 more.
They're all local. They're all local men. You'll have all their names
Korean
here.
nationals?
Pardon me?
Are there any Korean nationals?
The men?
Yeah.
I don't think so. No.
Are you guys going to be working with Korean officials, or you mentioned that a lot of the women came through Canada? Are you going to be working with Canadian law enforcement?
We'll be talking primarily to the Korean consulate here.
You mentioned that the identities of the buyers are in the case files. Are the identities of any of the women, the other women on the site, in the case files as well? And are they subject to...
Unlikely that will be released. The names of the victims will not be released.
But they're there.
Yes.
Does this have any relation to the handful of FBI search warrants that have been handed out in Bellevue in the last couple of months?
I don't know.
Can you be more specific?
I know that there was one handed out 2 months ago at a residence in Bellevue in which 2 women were removed from a home. I don't know if I can be more specific. Maybe I can get back to you later about that.
So in those instances, and I think Steve and I would both agree that investigations like that are still ongoing, so we'd just rather not comment.
So as you know, there are activists with the organization Sex Workers Outreach Project, and some of them are outside.
In my lobby,
Yeah,
as we speak.
exactly. Right, and their argument is that this is a place where they help catch people who traffic women, and they exchange information and they help keep each other safe on sites like this. And there are, dozens of women who are, or hundreds, willingly there, and not even doing illegal work, many of them.
I have 12 women that we are talking to right now that they did not protect by any stretch of the imagination. And I would ask you, when you interview those on your way out, ask them about that.
They would argue that it would be like a marketplace where you go and shut down, a food court, because in the food court stuff happens and there's criminal activity in the back alleyway. And so shutting down the entire thing forever is just not realistic, because then they're forced out into the streets.
Well, number one, it's not forever, because there's all kinds of other websites out there. There's all kinds of other food courts out there. And let's keep in mind that everything they are doing, every man that goes on that website for sex, every woman that advertises on there for sex, it is illegal. If they want to change that, then they need to get the legislature to change that. But it is illegal, and they are not protecting every single woman there. So they can take the most altruistic stand that they want to take, but it's not accurate.
Do you think you're protecting women by not allowing them to communicate about bad dates?
We do allow them to communicate about bad dates. There are hundreds of websites out there. We took down one. We took down the one of the most notorious ones, and the one that was directly affecting the city of Bellevue.
So I just have a procedural question. How do you take down a website these days? Was that at all difficult, or was that an easy thing to do?
I don't think it's ever been done before. You want to speak to that?
I don't know how it was done.
We got, because of the great attorneys that work for the prosecutor's office, some of whom are in this room right now, they got a court order from a judge that went to GoDaddy and a couple of days ago and said, here's a court order, you are to turn this website over to us, and we will host it from now on. And coincidentally, I got a phone call from GoDaddy today asking about my campaign website. So GoDaddy does a lot of different things, and they're not responsible for what websites they host. But that's how we did it. We got a court order from a judge, and again, unprecedented. As far as we can tell, it's never happened before. But because of the courage of the prosecutor's office that are willing to research this situation and take that step, we were able to do that. And I think it's very important.
Will it ever be opened up again, or is it down for good?
I don't know.
Can I respond to something I think
Sure.
somebody over here said about, instead of looking for and looking at this to provide women with a safe website to engage in this destructive behavior, why don't we re-examine this and let's ask ourselves, what can we do to provide these women with an alternative to selling their bodies in order to survive? And what goes along with that is all the abuse that is involved, self-medicating in order to get mentally and physically prepared to service 10 men a day, 6 to 7 days a week. I mean, come on, folks, we got to take a look at this in a different way.
What types of diversion programs do you offer?
I'm still new to the area, so I'm still learning that. Sheriff, do you want to take that one with the diversion programs, or do you want to refer?
Well, the reality is the police departments, the sheriff's office, Bellevue, FBI, we don't provide any diversion services, but we work with community-based organizations, and we are working with community-based organizations on this particular case to help these women find a way out of this life.
Sheriff, you talked about, again, going back to the men that you have names of, were those from the case you're talking about, or are you skimming from the website, all the material that you gained from the website, and now are you going to make that public?
The names that we have all come from this investigation that primarily came out of our investigation of the website and the cell phones and all the other electronic communications that we have.
So nothing from the website itself, people have been posting, is that part of going to be the public disclosure?
No, not if they just posted and never did anything except post, but the posts are reviews. So think of Yelp. People that post on Yelp went to that restaurant or that hotel and liked it or didn't like it. Well, this is exactly what this website was doing, with the added part that these women could advertise on there as well. And then if you saw something that you were interested in, you could read the reviews of this woman.
But did you seize the assets of that website?
The assets? No, we seized the website itself. And we will go after the assets of the man that was running the website.
Chief Milet, going back a moment to the Song Wang murder case, when this broke a few months ago, and many of us in the room were covering that, the question came up if this was related to human trafficking. I'm wondering if there's anything about the investigation of that case that led to the breaking of this case that we're talking about today.
For our involvement, the Sheriff's Department had been working on this before our involvement. Again, the way we became aware of this is that an alert citizen recognized that there was some unusual activity in the apartment complex and reported it. And we need that type of involvement from the public and the community in order for us to effectively dismantle these human trafficking organizations, especially in locations like that. So while the homicide happened, this investigation occurred after the homicide, and we didn't see a link at that point, but obviously we're rethinking that.
So promoting prostitution is a third Class C felony. We're talking 1 to 3 months. Was there any talk about, you keep calling it a criminal enterprise? I mean, 1 to 3 months doesn't seem like much of a punishment for some of these men. I mean, going after them federally or with RICO or as a criminal enterprise? Is there any talk about that?
Well, promoting prostitution, in this case for the members of the league, the people who put this review board together, means that they simply got together to advance prostitution. And I think that's an accurate label. That may not be where the end of this investigation. It may lead us to other places. But we have spent many hours within our office, and interns who've been forced to look at the review board for many hours. And I want to challenge anybody who says the review board is someplace that's dedicated to women's safety. That is completely not what it's about. It's absolutely there to promote prostitution, to encourage other customers to solicit specific prostitutes. It talks about the amount that will be charged. It talks about how to avoid being detected by the police, about how to avoid being detected at these very fancy apartment and condos, how to not draw attention. So it's really a how-to for those who want to be involved in prostitution. And I understand there's the sex worker outreach project and that they want to talk about rights for sex workers, but even that group, I would hope, would distinguish what they hope to see from what we see here. These young women didn't want to come here. They didn't want to be trapped in these apartments. They were brought here by a pipeline, a sinister criminal pipeline that looks to profit off of them. There's nothing joyous about what's happening here. This is not a right that these women that we rescued today are trying to establish. They were victims. They were trafficked. They were abused and commercially raped by men here in King County. That's what this case is about. And that's what is fueling us, because this is an international human trafficking ring. It's right here in King County, Washington, and we're offended by it.
What about using human trafficking charges?
You know, again, we're starting today with the crimes that we know that we can prove. We know that there are people, and they're not necessarily local, they may be other parts of the West Coast, that are more involved in the actual receipt of women who are forced by their criminal counterparts in Korea to be part of this thing. We know it goes much deeper than what we've seen today, but what we've seen today is enough to make us stop and say, is enough of this, and we have to dig deeper and find out who else is involved in importing women for this crime.
Let me add that this woman here, this young woman here, April 20th of 2015, this is not a mugshot. This is the woman that was new in town, and this picture was sent via cell phone to one of the people that were running this operation. Here she is less than a month later on the website. This is what happens. This is how they were exploited.
Sheriff, can you talk about how your department became involved in investigating this case?
We look at human trafficking on an ongoing basis. I have some very, very competent vice detectives, and we're not particularly interested in the street level prostitution anymore. We are interested on the demand side particularly, and on the human trafficking aspect of it, because it's a much more serious crime.
Attorney General Lynch gave credit to King County for its human trafficking investigations. And there was a grant of $1.5 million she talked about back in September. Is this part of this? Was this fueled by?
I didn't get any money.
I didn't get any money. No, I'm not sure where that $1 million went, but we didn't get it.
Is this part of the county's buyer beware program? Or continuation, or?
I can talk about that.
Yeah, please.
So we have received a grant from the Demand Abolition Group, which is part of the Hunt Family Foundation, and the program that we are working with other cities on is called Buyer Beware, and it's to recognize that prostitution is a harmful practice, and that it's created by the demand. And if there were no demand, there would be no harm. And so for so long, our efforts have been focused on prosecuting and convicting the women who are forced into this. Instead, we now see them as victims in need of services, and we need to really focus on the men who are driving the demand. There's no greater example that the demand causes the harm than this case, and how sophisticated that demand became when they came up with their own websites, at least 3 that we know of, that tried to steer other men into patronizing and to exploiting the women who were part of this international pipeline. So the Buyer Beware is a program we're part of. There's about 6 or 8 other cities that are part of it. We're the first ones that have gone after a group of buyers like this and called them promoters, because it takes 2 to promote. And to create the demand side is essential to the rest of the harm that goes along with prostitution.
I just want to make sure I clarify and understand one point. So you had just mentioned, Sheriff, that woman was new to town and then she ended up on the website. Were the people from the league, Mueller and the others, were they involved in bringing these women here at all? Or were they just involved in, once the women somehow got here, that they took them into the brothels that they had created?
For the most part, the league especially was involved once they got here in promoting them. One thing I want to talk about just a little bit again is the undercover detective that we used in this, that infiltrated the league. That we have a tremendous amount of good audio information from that eventually will all become public. I don't think any other organization in town that is doing this, whether it's a website, whether it's something similar to the league, they should all know that they are subject to being infiltrated. We are going to do that. We are going to continue to do that. That's how seriously we take this. We have gone after the demand side. The sheriff's office in particular has gone after the demand side for years and years and years. We used to call it a John Patrol. And we would go out there on a regular basis, typically monthly, down to Pacific Highway South, and we would arrest the men that were soliciting the street prostitutes. In fact, we arrested Gary Ridgway twice on John Patrols. So we get the importance of going after the demand side, but now we've carried it to the next level because of what's happened with the web and how it's proliferated so far beyond someone having to drive down to Pacific Highway South and drive back and forth to find somebody they were interested. Now they can do it, in theory, anonymously, but it's not anonymous, and we're going to make sure it doesn't stay anonymous. And every man out there that's thinking of doing this, that's thinking about getting on the internet, needs to know that we are going to be there. We're going to work the demand side as much as we possibly can. The men aren't the victims. The women typically are.
Characterize or generalize the
Sergi?
members of the league? Like, who are these guys? Are they all like, white professionals?
White male businessmen. None of them, I don't think any of them had a criminal record, is my understanding. They could go into the pump house in Bellevue, which is where we arrested them on Tuesday night, and sit around at a table, and no one would think a thing about it. And this is what they did on a regular basis.
Can you eliminate prostitution?
Of course not. Of course not. Is that a rhetorical question? No, we can't eliminate prostitution, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't go after it when we identify specific parts of it that we think are worse than other parts of it. And that's my personal view, not speaking for anybody else up here. But we can't arrest everybody, and we can't arrest our way out of society's problems. You've probably heard me say that 100 times. But we can rescue those 12 women. Those 12 women are better off today than they were a week ago because of our investigation. And I don't think nobody should be able to say anything against that particular statement.
Did I hear you say you arrested all the 12 men together at one spot?
We arrested, I think there were 8 out of the 14. I think there's 14 in the league locally. And we arrested 9 of them total. And one location because they have a meeting. They sit around, they sit around on a fairly regular basis, not every month, and they have a meeting and they talk about all this. And we had infiltrated them with an undercover detective, and we knew when the meeting was, and we knew where it was, and we knew what time it was, and we went over there. Bellevue actually did. Bellevue uniformed people marched into the pump house and arrested them.
It was a beautiful sight.
It has nothing to do with the pump house, trust me. I love that place.
So then what about the other 4 or 5 members of the league you've identified?
If we haven't arrested them by now, we will.
Will you release mugshots?
No, we can't. Mugshots are not releasable under state law.
Are they having appearances today?
Should be today, right?
I think they've been charged. So there's no first appearance. So they've already been charged, right,
Yeah.
Gary? So it'll be arraignment
2 weeks.
2 weeks from now.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding, Sheriff, the link between the group that's bringing these women over here and the league and the review board. What is the link there besides the women?
Probably just the women. For example, but again, this is really complex. For example, one of the women, and we've got this from her affidavit, was debt bondage. Her parents owed a debt to Korean organized crime in South Korea. And when they couldn't get paid, these hooligans would come into her parents' house and beat up her parents and destroy the furniture and do all of this. So she was very fearful for her parents. And they gave her a way out. You come to the United States, you work for us, not telling her what the work was going to be, and we will forgive your parents' debt. And so they flew her over here to Seattle on a visa, and she came in, a tourist visa. She came in, and I forget the details, but she went back to Korea. But for whatever reason, she couldn't get another tourist visa to come back right away. So they took her into Vancouver, BC. Somebody met her when she got off the plane, just like they did when she came into Seattle. Met her when she came off the plane, picked her up, drove her to a field at the border somewhere, said, walk that way and we'll pick you up on the other side. Well, she'd get picked up by ICE crossing over. They interviewed her for a long time and for whatever reason let her go. And she was picked up by her contact over here and delivered to the brothel. So now the brothel has this new Korean woman And they send out a picture like this, and then she ends up like this, and they use her. And she does what we've told you she's done. And then at some point, typically after 30 days, she will be shipped off to Las Vegas or California or some other place to work down there, and we'll get those women up here.
John, what can you tell us about Mueller? Did he come to Bellevue for this endeavor? Is he from the area? Is he local? What's his deal?
I don't know anything about him. And we're almost done here. We've got huge press packets for you.
Mr. Mueller is a Bellevue resident. Again, he started out as a buyer and kind of liked what he was doing, learned the business, and started moving into the ownership and controller of a brothel. The length of time he's been involved in this business, I'm not sure, but he's in a different place now. And if I can, this last one thing I'd like to say is a lot of people are watching this and will watch this. If there's any victim or any person, any woman that is in this position, please reach out to one of the local law enforcement agencies for assistance. There are choices, you have options. You don't need to be doing this, and we're here to help you. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.